Section 3 of On Being Negro in America by J. Saunders Reading. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 3. But the years of my 20s were enkindling and tumultuous. The world was well into that series of social revolutions which started, we are told, with the First World War, and is not yet ended, and the American Negro people were a kind of revolutionary catalytic agent in their own country. It was their historic role, to be sure, but it had been suspended while Negroes played a supernumerary part in the European conflict. Americans in general seemed not to realize what had happened in Europe. They did not think of it as change. It was merely an eruption which they had helped put down, and were intent on sealing off with the cement of isolationism. But after the war, American Negroes re-enlivened the spirit of revolt, and the country was alarmed by the truculent persistence with which they fought for the dire anti-lynching bill, for instance, and by the vigor of their opposition to the confirmation of Judge John Parker to the United States Supreme Court, and by the inroads of communism among them, and by their implacable solidarity in the Scottsboro case. How emotional the times were! What comings together! What incitement! Out of college just 3 years at the time of the Scottsboro case in 1931, I remember the almost weekly meetings. Especially do I remember one at which Alice Dunbar Nelson spoke, the widow of Paul Dunbar, a Negro poet nationally famous at the turn of the century. Mrs. Nelson had been one of my teachers in high school, and an old family friend. She was beautiful, tall, with ivory skin and a head of glinting red-gold hair, and she was also of great and irresistible charm. One thought of her as being saturated in a serene culture, even in divinity. I doubt that she had ever been much concerned with the common run of Negroes, and that night, as she spoke to a large audience of all classes of a united people, she was like a goddess come to earth, but a goddess. In the end, with tears glistening in her eyes, she stretched out her gloved hands and cried, "Thank God for the Scottsboro case. It has brought us together." It was a thing to arouse even one constitutionally insensible to mass excitement, and I was not insensible, not in those days. I had found that out the year before. My second in the Deep South, a student of mine, was murdered, apparently in cold blood, by a white man or men. It happened in the late afternoon, in a section of Atlanta some distance from the college, and I knew nothing of it for several hours. But that night a colleague of about my own age rushed into my dormitory room without the usual courtesy of knocking. "Come on," he said, gesturing vehemently. "We got to go." I resented his bursting in on me. We did not particularly care for each other anyway. "You might have knocked," I said. "For Christ's sake, this is no time for the amenities," he said. "We've got to go." "Go where? I'm not going anywhere." "To the meeting." "What meeting?" "My God, man, don't you know that Dennis Hubert's been lynched?" His eyes blazed like fires in a draught. He was greatly agitated. "What?" It must have been a yawp of horror and disbelief. The boy had sat in my class not 5 hours before. "Lynched by some goddamn drunken crackers. The Negroes out in East Atlanta are getting together, and we're going to get together too. We're not going to take this lying down. Those crackers might come out here any time." I could not follow his thinking, even after he reminded me that a relative, either an uncle or a cousin, of the murdered boy was on the college faculty. But the dangerous possibilities of those crackers coming bloomed in my imagination like poisonous flowers. "And if they come, then what?" I said. "That's what we're having the meeting for. Come on." And I went. We were only a few, mostly younger instructors, and we tried to appear disciplined and resolute, but hysteria was abroad, and I was caught up in it long enough to pledge to buy a gun through the underground means we had to employ, and long enough to be thrilled by the possession of it when it was delivered in great secrecy the next day, and even long enough to wish to use it on any skulking white man that offered. The college environs, and I suppose all the Negro sections of the city, were like alerted camps. There were many false alarms. Cars loaded with white men were prowling the neighborhood. Another student had been murdered. Some white youths had caught a Negro girl coming from work, stripped her of her clothes, and chased her naked through the downtown streets. And to match these were the heroics, like guarding the house of the college president and of the Hubert relative who was on the faculty. Every few days for a month Negroes held meetings, but after a time I did not go to them any more. They came to seem like public displays of very private emotions, in the same unbecoming taste of those obscene religious services in which worshippers handled snakes. One day I took my gun and the box of bullets that came with it, and rode out into the country and fired at a dead tree. Wrapped in greased gray flannel in a cardboard box, the gun is still somewhere among my possessions, but I have not seen it since. End of Section 3. Section 4 of On Being Negro in America by J. Saunders Reading. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Many Negroes will deny that the force which I have described as demonic has operated in their lives. If asked about it, they will take quick offense, as if it were of the same stripe as an unnatural sex drive, which, of course, is wisely kept secret by those who possess it. They will aver that they live normal, natural, wholesome lives, even in the South. They will point out their normal interests in their professional lives and in their home lives. They will tick off the list of their white friends. They will say, truthfully enough, "Oh, there are ways to avoid prejudice and segregation." I have no quarrel with them, nor with any others. It is simply that I do not believe them. Having to avoid prejudice and segregation is itself unwholesome, and the constant doing of it is skating very close to a psychopathic edge. My experience has been that no 2 or 3 Negroes ever come together for anything, even so unracial a thing as, say, a Christmas party, but that the principal subject of conversation is race. One grows mortally sick of it. So, in a sense, partly through the writing of this essay, I seek a purge, a catharsis, wholesome, as all of us do, perhaps unconsciously, in one way or another. I do this consciously, feeling that I owe it to myself. I need to do it for spiritual reasons, as others need to seek God. Indeed, there is a kind of God-seeking, or at least an exorcism. To observe one's feelings, fears, doubts, ambitions, hates, to understand their beginnings and weigh them is to control them and to destroy their dominance. By setting certain things down, I hope to get rid of something that is unhealthy in me, that is perhaps unhealthy in most Americans, and so face the future with some tranquillity. Also and finally, I hope this piece will stand as the epilogue to whatever contribution I have made to the literature of race. I want to get on to other things. I do not know whether I can make this clear, but the obligations imposed by race on the average educated or talented Negro, if this sounds immodest, it must, are vast and become at last onerous. I'm tired of giving up my creative initiative to these demands. I think I am not alone. I once heard a world-famous singer saying that as beautiful as the spirituals are and as great a challenge as they present to her artistry, she was weary of the obligation of finding a place for them in every program, as if they were theme music, wholly identifying her. She was tired of trying to promote in others and of keeping alive in herself a race pride that had become disingenuous and peculiar. The spirituals belong to the world, she said, and yet I'm expected to sing them as if they belong only to me and other Negroes, and as if I believe my talent is most rewardingly and truly fulfilled in singing them. And I just don't think it necessarily is. As a matter of fact, she added, she was having more and more trouble feeling her way into them. I knew what she meant. She could no longer be arrested in ethnocentric coils. She did not wish to be. The human spirit is bigger than that. The specialization of the census in talent and learning, more than 3/4 of the Negro PhDs have done their doctoral dissertations on some subject pertaining to the Negro. That is expected of Negroes by other members of their race and by whites is tragic and vicious and divisive. I am tired of trying, in deference to this expectation, to feel my way into the particularities of response and reaction that are supposed to be exclusively Negro. I'm tired of the unnatural obligation of converting such talent and learning as I have into specialized instruments for the promotion of a false concept called race. This extended essay, then, is probably my last public comment on the so-called American race problem. End of section 4.